when you're creating a character just out of your imagination and you're just illustrating it with your own marks and not having to composite it from other people's pixels, background is very secondary to character, right? So in this little character design painting, they created this cute little caterpillar kind of cat character, and then they just found a setting that complemented it, right? But you'll notice that the setting is very blah and not even in focus, and all the lighting that's on the character is more for the character than for the setting. When you composite, though, let's say that you composite and you put all your elements together, and this is not a class example, this is an outside world example that's not particularly convincing, right? Could you put this into an environment and make it believable? So, can you take a composite and put it into an environment, neither of which are very believable on their own? And can you make them kind of merge? So this project's all about trying these different ways. So these are external examples that aren't so successful. Here's one that's just really creepy and not very successful. Right? But this is something that people try to do, right? So here's one that takes a digital painting that's based on a composite, right? But then just kind of painted over, which just plays with the proportions of this deer, which are very funny, and then composites it into a real photo. Now, when you composite into a real photo, into a real landscape with its own lighting, with its own gravity, with its own perspective, you have to consider a lot of things. So why does this work believably? And it's just humorous. Well, it's because the feet line up with the perspective of the ground. It's because the view of the creature works with the eye line of the viewer. It's because the lighting makes sense, right? With this soft, diffused light on the back and then the deep kind of soft form shadow underneath. I would like to see more of a cast shadow underneath the creature, which we don't really have here, which would make it even more believable. But then these are my favorite examples. And these just take, 8-bit Nintendo characters this one's from Mario Kart, and then put them believably into a pre-photographed background. And so what really sells that Bowser here, who doesn't match in terms of lighting, right? Doesn't match in terms of color. How does he work? Well, this is all the little special effects that we can do now with compositing. We can add little tracks going behind his cart. We can add the spray of water coming off of it. And just really understand the perspective. This is a little dolphin from an old game. And it shows the reflection in the water and the water being displaced as it jumps out. And then this is probably my favorite example. This is from Street Fighter 2. And the bonus level where you destroy a car. And just the little addition of that shadow underneath him, right? Makes it work. But it makes it work because the lighting already on him is matching the lighting direction of this photo. So these are subtle things we're dealing with. Lighting, shadow, overlaps, atmosphere. That's what's going to sell the effect. And we can use it in very creative ways. You're not limited by laws of physics in this project. So how do we get started? We're going to take, this is a composite I want to show you that I found. We're going to take your fantasy creature, so Voltron made of cats, and we're going to try to put it into a fantasy landscape. And the idea is that it should be your own fantasy landscape. It gives you an extra excuse to polish up assignment 1 and polish up assignment 2. But if your original landscape just doesn't work or just isn't finished enough to work for this, you can put your creature into any landscape as long as you do it believably, where your creature is still the dominant focal point of at least 25%. So let's see how we can do this. You can make your creature any scale to do this. These are some past student examples, right? So this is how we approach it. First, we go back to assignment 2. And now we're going to make kind of a clean character pass. So if you have to clean up any debris, you do that first. You want to have a really clean cutout. But for this assignment, we are going to turn off the background, turn off everything that we don't want, and then we are going to merge everything. So we're just going to say layer merge down or merge visible, right? And then we're going to delete every other layer and save this, very important, as a different name. So we're going to say File, Save As, Assignment 3, and I call this a CreatureScape. And then this is our figurative element. So I call it the CreatureScape figure, and I'm going to save that to the desktop. And I'm going to save it as a Photoshop element. So it's full resolution, right? And it's transparent layer. I don't want to save it as a PNG because I don't want it to lose any quality opening and then closing it. And online formats do lose quality. And I don't want to save it as a JPEG because I want the careful cutout. I don't want it to get filled in with white. Okay, now you can see that that's on my desktop. Well, I have that open. The name has changed. Now I go back to assignment 1. And I need to pull that element, which is my finished landscape. But again, I don't want the JPEG from it. I want the PSD. You know, the most finished PSD. So I'm going to open that up. It will open in Photoshop. And my creature will be a second tab in Photoshop that's open. So I can expand Photoshop a little bit so it has some room. Our landscapes are quite large, right? And our creatures are quite large, which is good, which means we have print resolution enough to really showcase them. And all I want to try to get done by the end of class today is putting the layers together and seeing the options I have. Because before we can make the lighting match, make shadows, bring in atmosphere, we have to know where the creature is going to be placed. So this is placing our creature, right? And before you can really do this well, you have to make sure that your creature is cut out cleanly and that major issues are resolved within them. Though if there's little things that you still wanted to work on with your creature, those could be covered up with the stuff of landscape, right? This is a very unforgiving way to have to show a creature. Okay, so I have my PSD here of my landscape with all my texture overlays, with all this different stuff going on. And what I'm going to do is pull out my creature like that, and then using the move tool, just take the creature, and you can do it from either the layer like that or the creature itself like this. It's going to work best with the layer, and drop it onto your landscape. Right? And that was just a happy accident that I placed him and it went right above the tree line. But my God, that works pretty well. But the first thing you do is you put him on the very top. So this is him on the very top, right? And then you can use Command left bracket to move him down through the layers. Now notice just that first step does a lot. That first step pushes him behind the texture overlays, which does a lot to change his color, change the edges. And then as I move him back through the layers, he just gets further and further away. Now this is not an intentional placement, right? But that looks pretty great. That does look very Godzilla-like. But it doesn't give me a lot of opportunity to show you how to play with shadow and how to play with other stuff. Though I do love how the house is overlapping his belly. So I'm going to actually do this. I'm going to make a duplicate of it because I like his placement there. I'm going to call that placement 1. I'll label that layer. Because I might go back and actually do that as my project. But let me play with placement 2 now, because you want to try on a few different things. because my creature isn't designed to be 80 feet tall. So I can use the transform tool now. And your creature should come in pretty large because your creature is large resolution. And I'm going to say, okay, I want my creature to be smaller, but I don't want him to be so tiny, that he's pointless to put in this environment. So the smaller your creature is, if you want him to show up, you have to put him more and more into the foreground. So let's say I want him about that size. Now let's move him up into the foreground. Oops. I'm going to turn off auto select here because of the texture overlays and just stay on my placement 2. And I'll mark that with orange. And now I got to figure out, okay, where do his feet make sense with the environment? And his feet seem to line up pretty well there. I can nudge him a little bit. I can also decide that I don't want the whole fantasy landscape to be part of it. I could decide to actually crop my landscape, right? To kind of suit my creature's placement a little bit better. Does that make sense? So we're controlling all elements here. Now, if I do that, I've just lost a lot of information. So I'm going to save this as a different name. So this will be assignment 3, placement 1, or placement 2 rather. And save it to the desktop. And then I'm going to go back in my history before I cropped. Turn off placement 1, turn off placement 2, turn on placement 1, which I won't take long to finish up. And then I'm going to save this as assignment 3, placement 1 to the desktop. Now by renaming it, we have protected our first assignment, right? We don't want to undo all the work we did for assignment 1. And so by renaming it assignment 3 and then playing with different placements, these are the new Photoshop files I'll play with, and they will go into an assignment 3 folder. So even though we're combining our 2 last assignments, we don't want to in any way overwrite those old assignments. I can close this, the assignment 3 Creaturescape figure, but that will go into my reference here, right? And you don't need to sketch for this. Instead, we get to play within Photoshop and try different things out. So play with placements and then have a placement that you're most excited about for next class so that we can then work on lighting and atmosphere. So I have placement 1 and placement 2. And notice that you can crop your setting as well. It might mean it might not print quite as big, but it should still print to our 8x10 standard, as long as you're not cropping to a really tiny part of your piece. You want it to be placed, your creature to be placed, so it's a pretty strong focal point in your landscape. So this takes up about 25% of the visual space. If I didn't crop it, then it wouldn't take up enough space to be visually interesting, right? And when you're placing your creature, if you're thinking of composition, those of you who have taken design, you want to line it up with one of the rule of thirds lines, which the crop tool helpfully puts for us. So clearly this is a focal point, it's lined up with the rule of thirds, but the dominant focal point is going to be the thing that's most contrasted, most visible. And I really like the kind of diagonal nature of the rain with this. Okay, so now once you've placed him, then you want to start noticing and refining the placement. I don't want him too close to any one edge. I think I want him kind of back here so that his foot can be overlapped by this driftwood, right? And so just one little thing, the first thing we're going to play with is what's called relative perspective, things overlapping. So what can overlap your character to make it more believable? Well, I can take this little corner of driftwood and have it overlap the foot. That doesn't mean I want to erase the foot.